Now that Governor Greg Abbott has signed an executive order banning government-mandated vaccine passports in Texas, we're taking a closer look at the legalities of it all. Joining me is Attorney Jeff Drummond, partner at Jackson Walker LLP. Good morning to you, and I'm really glad you're here to talk to us about this. Now, Governor Abbott said one of the reasons for the ban was to protect private health information. So how does HIPAA play into all of this? Do they have anything to do with each other, or is this completely a separate deal?
Well, they only have a little bit to do with each other, and they're really not. HIPAA doesn't directly apply here. Most of the federal laws related to privacy in the U.S. are sectoral. They relate to a particular industry. In healthcare, we have HIPAA, but HIPAA only applies to certain types of data, healthcare data, which is the type of data here. But HIPAA itself only applies to healthcare plans, like insurance companies or your employee benefit plan, healthcare providers, and not even all of those, but most healthcare providers, and then certain other types of entities that deal with healthcare. If you're not one of those types of entities, then you're not covered by HIPAA, and so you don't have any HIPAA obligations. So for an airline or a regular governmental agency that's not a healthcare component of a governmental agency, they don't have any HIPAA obligations. So HIPAA just doesn't apply to them.
And we have heard a lot of people questioning if this ban against vaccine passports in Texas is even legal. What would you say to them about that?
Well, it depends upon how it's structured, and it depends upon what the various components are involved and whether there's any way to deal with it and to sort of get around it. Generally, the executive order by the governor, because he's acting under emergency powers anyway, the governor generally, as the chief executive of the state, has a lot of authority to dictate what goes on. His executive order applies to state agencies and says that state agencies and state governmental entities won't do these things. And he probably almost certainly has that power. It also applies to other entities that receive state funding. And it depends upon whether or not the restrictions are reasonably related to legitimate government interests. And given that his restrictions really are restrictions on other restrictions, then it sort of turns it on its head and it says you can't restrict these certain things. So to some extent, it's more of a preventing restrictions from occurring than requiring restrictions, and you get a little bit more latitude as a government when you're requiring things to remain open that way. So there's probably, as written, the executive order doesn't look like on its face like it's terrible, but you could argue that it violates certain constitutional rights. For example, a business should have the right to make certain decisions about the way it operates its own business. And if the executive order said no business can say, you have to do these particular things, that would probably be beyond what the governor's power is as chief executive of the state.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that our viewers are really questioning is why is it allowed, or some places in Texas allowed, to require a negative COVID test, yet there is a requirement vaccine now banned? They're just confused about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sort of depends upon what it is that the requirement is for, and whether or not it relates to what either the services being provided or the situation. For example, employers generally can require that employees be vaccinated for particular illnesses if it relates to what their employment status is. For example, healthcare, a lot of healthcare entities require all of their employees to get the flu vaccine every year. Now, they usually will have some permitted exceptions, such as if you have a medical reason why you can't get the vaccine, you're allergic to it, something along those lines. So for those reasons, generally you can opt out. Also, if you have a strong religious belief as to why you shouldn't be able to get the vaccine, or why you shouldn't have a vaccine, or you can't have a vaccine, those in the employment situation, it requires really either a medical or a religious restriction. And even then, if there's no way the employer can accommodate that restriction, then they generally can say, well, it's a condition of employment that you have this. Schools is another place where you see required vaccines, and there the vaccination actually is required by the state. And so it sort of turns it around. The state's actually the one that's requiring the vaccinations. And in a school situation, the question really is the fact that, A, you have children involved, and the state has more authority to put restrictions in place or to protect children than it does the rest of the population, because they don't get to make their own choices and they're impacted by choices other people are making. Also, schools, you have kids all together, and so you have a chance for a child to be infected from another student.
All right, Jeff, thank you so much for this valuable information. I know you helped our viewers a lot. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you, Melissa.